There was almost nothing for quite a while. The silence was for many hours pretty deafening.
Francis Carr from BBC Monitoring's Russia team was glued to the TV, waiting for updates as the news of the Wagner mutiny broke.
Well, nothing much happened overnight, and it was only in the morning when President Putin gave this address, in which he accused the organisers of this armed mutiny, as he named it, as traitors, without naming, of course, Yevgeny Prigozhin himself. And I think really this shows how much this rattled President Putin.
Once he set the tone, the floodgate of reactions opened. This is Russian MP Andrei Gurulyov on State TV, spelling out what he says is the only way forward, a bullet in Prigozhin's head. The world is still processing what these dramatic events mean and what the ripple effects would be beyond Russia's borders. In this episode of the Global Jigsaw, we examine the story from the perspective of countries which have a reason to pay close attention. I'm Krassi Twig, and this is the Global Jigsaw, an original podcast from BBC Monitoring, zooming in on political, security and social shifts around the world through the lens of its media. Our team listens to, watches and analyzes media narratives in 100 languages.
Radio Tehran.
Right, we must go now to Moscow.
Мы не вторгались на территорию Украины.
Western countries are not the international community. That era has finished.
I mean, have you got any thoughts on that?
In this episode, you'll hear from BBC Monitoring experts around the world piecing together a truly global jigsaw. Let's start from the beginning with Francis.
We saw in the afternoon on Friday Yevgeny Prigozhin posting an audio message, and it was only actually at 1:30 in the morning, Moscow time, that the main presenter of the news on Channel 1, one of the main state channels, was whisked back into the studio, presumably out of bed, to give this emergency news bulletin. We saw from Russian state TV what we normally see when Russia is faced by some kind of crisis. They stick very closely to statements coming from the top until later on when they get their firmer instructions.
So once they received those instructions, what kind of takes did you hear from the all-influential TV personalities?
Well, this is known as the metodichka among Russian media watchers. It's an instruction that comes down from the Kremlin to state TV channels on how to cover certain developments. And what we saw, once it became clear that this mutiny had failed, was an attempt to present it as some kind of victory, that Russian society had shown absolutely no support for this failed mutiny attempt. Ignoring, of course, the videos we saw coming on social media out of Rostov, where Yevgeny Prigozhin is being cheered. The very fact that these Wagner fighters were allowed to get within 200 kilometers of Moscow, if Prigozhin is to be believed, showed that this unity that we saw trumpeted on state TV was perhaps not quite as clear-cut as they might want the Russian people to believe.
We've seen people locked for innocuous acts like attending protests, and yet here you have a mutiny, and there are victims of this mutiny, and they get away with it.
Well, that's one of the biggest questions that is hanging over this whole issue, is that in Russia you can be jailed for years for a post on social media if the authorities deem it to be violating one of the many laws effectively strangling free speech. And yet Putin himself has admitted that several pilots were killed by Wagner fighters on their march towards Moscow, and yet charges have been dropped against them by the Russian authorities. This is very confusing, given that state media has been really hammering home the point that Prigozhin is a traitor. Dmitry Kiselyov, he's one of the key presenters on Russian TV, in his main weekly show, airing an old interview with President Putin in which he's asked, "Are you able to forgive people?" And President Putin answers,
"Да.
I can forgive most things, but not betrayal."
А что невозможно простить? Предательство.
Now, this doesn't sit easily with the fact that suddenly these people have been allowed to go to Belarus without any kind of punishment.
There is a lot of speculation and unconfirmed reports about what is happening in Russia. After the show of unity on the main Russian TV channels, the conspicuous silence on the subject of the mutiny returned.
And what I think is interesting is that by Tuesday, so just 3 days after these events, it had almost disappeared entirely from state TV. It was almost as if this coup or mutiny, whatever you want to call it, was such a minor development that it didn't need to be covered anymore. And this shows that they want the Russian population to pretty much forget about this and move on.
Yevgeny Prigozhin is the man of the hour, but up until a year ago, little was known about him.
This is a man, Yevgeny Prigozhin, who has been called Putin's chef in the past for his catering contracts being provided to the Kremlin, and has been regarded by many as someone who Putin could rely on to do the Kremlin's dirty business in many areas. The thing with Prigozhin is, up until around last year, when we saw him recruiting prisoners to go and fight for Wagner in Ukraine, this was an extremely shadowy figure. We knew very little about him. And there were rare photos of him. There's a photo of him serving wine to George W. Bush in the Kremlin when he visited decades ago. And there's a photo of him at a meeting between President Putin and various members of the Russian military elite with representatives of Libya, a country where Wagner mercenaries were believed to be active. And it's only really a year ago that he gained more of a public profile, became very active on social media, posting these audio messages.
Convicted in his youth for theft and robbery, Prigozhin spent 9 years in jail. So he clicked with the prison crowd, and once they joined his mercenary group, he could count on their loyalty. Wagner fighters first appeared in Ukraine in 2014. Not long after that, they were spotted in several locations in the Middle East too, which explains those pictures of Prigozhin with Libyan officials. 4 years ago, Wagner backed renegade General Khalifa Haftar's attempt to take the Libyan capital Tripoli. Samia Hosni from our Middle East team followed their trail.
Eastern Libya is dominated by a strong man, Khalifa Haftar, and he's had massive support and crucial support from Wagner since 2019.
Are they still deployed, and do we know how large their contingent is?
We have reports and Western assessments that say that Wagner forces are based in oil installations and military bases in eastern and southeast Libya, all dominated and controlled by the Libyan national armies of Khalifa Haftar.
Libya has been divided since 2014 into competing political and military factions based in different parts of the country. So how has the media there covered the news of the Wagner rebellion?
Pro-Haftar outlets were noticeably silent. Naturally, the anti-Haftar media were interested in the development. If you look at the Libya Al-Ahrar channel based in Turkey, they did cover the mutiny, and in their flagship talk show, they had two guests who are anti-Putin, anti-Wagner, anti-Haftar.
خلاف داخلي روسي أطرافه المؤسسات الروسية الرسمية وشركة فاغنر.
And they talked at length about the possible scenarios, what would happen next. We hear about people wishing unseating Putin because that could result in Wagner pulling out of eastern Libya.
Is that what stands in the way of Libya being a united country?
That is one of the reasons why Libya is so divided. Foreign interference, whether by Wagner, by Turkey, by neighboring Egypt, foreign interference is a key obstacle to Libya being reunited again.
There is another divided country in the Middle East where Wagner has played a critical role.
In Syria, first of all, Putin's air power and military and political backing to Bashar al-Assad, the Syrian president, was crucial. It kept him in power. It helped him in shifting the tide of the conflict since 2015.
The conflict Samia mentioned started as a peaceful uprising against the president 12 years ago and turned into a full-scale civil war. It has left at least 500,000 people dead and hundreds of thousands missing. The different sides of the conflict naturally have opposing views on Russia's and Wagner's role there. How was Prigozhin's mutiny seen in Syria?
We saw the news agency SANA, which is the state news agency, running posts talking about Western disappointment, talking about Wagner's downfall, and saying that it's business as usual in Russia. Opposition media in Syria are reveling in the news of Wagner turning against Putin. Some outlets were discussing and debating and hoping that what's happening could be the beginning of the end for Putin.
Abdirahim Saeed from our jihadist media team brings another perspective on this story.
Russia and the Wagner Group have a military footprint in various Muslim conflict zones, and militant jihadist groups present in these conflict zones are fighting on the opposite side. The two high-profile jihadist groups, Islamic State Group and Al-Qaeda, have previously made their enmity clear to Russia and Wagner. So it's no surprise supporters of these groups have been quick to show their glee on social media platforms.
So what have they been saying on those platforms that you watch?
Mainly they've been painting the recent events in Russia as divine justice. That's what they've been calling it. They see the mutiny as an unexpected chance, a potential weak spot in a powerful adversary. One official from the dominant Islamist group HTS in Syria, which is fighting the Syrian government and which used to be an Al-Qaeda affiliate, welcomed the Russian infighting. Another figure who used to be linked to this same group in Syria, HTS, prayed for a fierce war between the Russians that will keep, in his words, them busy.
How are the Wagner mercenaries seen in Syria, and why has Russia sent them there in the first place? Samia again.
So they are seen as part of the Russian military presence in Syria. And Russia has a big military base, an Hmeimim military base near Latakia, and it's crucial for Russia's emerging power as a global power, especially in the Eastern Mediterranean. Putin is not just an ally of Assad. They provide the lifeline for his survival. Putin is the one who calls the shot in Syria, basically. In the past, we saw a lot of Putin flying directly to Hmeimim and not stopping in Damascus.
There is another foreign player with a stake in Syria, and it's Russia's friend Iran. Moscow and Tehran go back a long way, as Barry Sadid from our Iran team told me.
It's a strategic alliance between two regional powers, but it's not one that lacks a checkered past. Well, Russia's history in Iran is remembered as a history of imperialism. Having said that, what we have right now is a real alliance based on a shared distrust of the West. I think we can refer to kind of several milestones in this, in particular the Arab Spring in 2011 and the beginning of Iranian and Russian military cooperation in Syria to uphold the Assad government, and the collapse of the nuclear deal as a key turning point. And Russia was a clear and obvious partner in this. And most recently, we have obviously Ukraine, kind of a continuation of this pattern of military cooperation between Iran and Russia, although Iran still denies it.
And how did the media in Iran cover the events?
Obviously, we have a spectrum of media in Iran. Amongst the state-line, hardline media, what we had was almost mirroring what the officials were saying, but in more detail. Again, downplaying the revolt, but at the same time blaming it on the West and using it as an example of malign Western interference in Russia. So ultra-conservative Kayhan claimed that the insurrection was a result of NATO resorting to Wagner's treason to compensate for his battlefield losses. Similarly, the national broadcaster's newspaper called the Wagner Group a Western Trojan horse in the heart of Russia.
Did you sense any real concerns about these cracks appearing in Russia as a strong ally of Iran?
I think we can read the attempts to downplay the mutiny almost as kind of a concern in itself. And actually on the Iranian side, we haven't seen any reports about concerns about Wagner's presence in Syria. And I think it's something that they definitely want to avoid reporting on, or even stressing that there was somehow a threat to Iran and Russia's military alliance in Syria because of the insurrection. I think Russia also kind of provided a similar kind of rhetorical support to Iran during the protests. refraining from the recent Mahsa Amini protest that began in September, refraining from criticizing Iran and stressing Iran's underlying stability and the role of Western interference in those protests as well.
3 years after their involvement in Syria began, Wagner mercenaries appeared in an unexpected location, in a country that has never been part of the Soviet sphere of influence. It was 2018, and the initial mission was to provide security to the president of the Central African Republic. The Russians were seen to have successfully quelled a rebellion there, which entrenched public support for them in the wider region at a time of strong anti-colonial sentiments. Our Africa media analyst Beverly Ochieng explains the consequences.
French forces have left Mali, and the Wagner mercenaries are believed to have taken over some of their bases in the northern regions. There has been an aggressive anti-French, anti-UN forces campaign both in the Central African Republic and in Mali. Mali has called for the expulsion of UN peacekeepers.
Here is Mali's Foreign Minister Abdoulaye Diop requesting at the UN that around 13,000 MINUSMA personnel leave without delay.
Le gouvernement du Mali demande le retrait sans délai de la MINUSMA. Cependant, le gouvernement est disposé à coopérer avec les Nations Unies.
And activists in Mali who are pro-Russian, they want UN peacekeepers to be replaced by Russian forces.
À partir de minuit 00.
Last week, the UN Security Council voted to end its peacekeeping mission in the country. The withdrawal of MINUSMA forces started on 1st of July, according to Mali State TV.
Des Affaires étrangères et de la coopération internationale.
De façon collective, a voté à l'unanimité la résolution 2690.
Wagner's purported aim in Mali is to fight jihadist groups, and they clearly enjoy some popular support. But there is a feeling in some quarters that Russia's mercenaries have worsened the security situation. The US Treasury accused them of engaging in mass executions, rape and abductions, both in Mali and the CAR. The Armed Conflict Location and Event Data Project put the number of civilian deaths in Mali at 2,000, just in 2022. Before the mutiny, Wagner's leader spelled out the group's ambitions for the continent.
Prigozhin made some public statements about the possibility that some of his strongest fighters would be going to Africa. There was also this wave of recruitment advertisements on pro-Wagner outlets that were targeting French-speaking countries.
Our team has observed how the Kremlin's message has been amplified by Africa-based troll farms, allegedly run by Prigozhin. In addition to the advertised aim of providing security, a big reason for Wagner's presence on the continent is believed to be money-making. The CAR, for example, is rich in natural resources like diamond, copper, gold, uranium, and Russia's mercenary arm has reportedly been involved in the mining business.
In the CAR, the economic interests of the Wagner Group continue to grow. They're now in the vodka business. There was an allegation that they attacked a French beer factory that was based in Bangui, and they're still aggressively attacking Western interests in the CAR. And the dependency that the CAR has on the Wagner Group is concerning in light of the rebellion.
Transparency has not been Wagner's forte with regards to its financing. Its dealings have always been a murky affair. But last week, there was a big revelation, which Francis picked up.
Most people had assumed that it was funded by the Russian state through some kind of shadowy schemes, which allowed them this plausible deniability, this ability to distance themselves from Wagner and its activities in the Middle East and in Africa in particular.
Я уже сказал по поводу Вагнера. Я сказал, что российское государство к этому не имеет никакого отношения.
Only last year, President Putin denied that Russia had anything to do with the Wagner Group.
Wagner, of course, became much more prominent in the public eye since the invasion of Ukraine. And on the 27th of June, Putin actually admitted that Wagner had been funded by the state, saying that between May 2022 and May 2023 alone, the state had paid Wagner 86 billion rubles, so just over $1 billion, for salaries and incentive payments. And this was just dropped in by Putin in the wake of the failed mutiny. And really, this is a huge admission, something that people had been trying to get to the bottom of for years now, and the Russian state had just denied.
Содержание всей группы Вагнера полностью обеспечилась государством.
This is Vladimir Putin, publicly owning Wagner as Russia's foreign policy tool for the first time, removing the group's key design feature, plausible deniability. So what's the likely impact of the mutiny on Wagner operations in Africa if the group goes under the control of the Russian armed forces? Back to Bev.
In the short term, it's not clear if there will be an immediate change to operations. There was a statement later on by Lavrov in the aftermath of the mutiny saying that Russian instructor operations in the CAR and in Mali will continue.
Роль Российской Федерации на африканском континенте.
He didn't call them the Wagner Group. In theory, the Wagner Group is indispensable to the Kremlin because it has enabled it to gain a foothold in regions that had either been forgotten by the West or regions where they've been able to dislodge the West and demonstrate their diplomatic strength and also their sort of credibility when it comes to defense and military opportunities and security cooperation. But it's also a bit of a concern when Prigozhin, post-mutiny, said that only 1% to 2% of Wagner fighters had registered with the Ministry of Defense. Is there the possibility of a standoff between locally based Wagner mercenaries as well as Russian forces or Russian diplomatic engagements in those countries? It's still something to be seen, and whether African governments will be forced to have to choose between the two.
Have any of the notable pro-Russian voices in Africa taken sides?
So at the very start of the rebellion, there was very muted official or media reporting, particularly in countries where Wagner forces have been very prevalent. For a long time, these accounts have operated as if the Wagner Group and the Kremlin are one and the same. During the rebellion, it did appear as if there was a bit of a dilemma. So for a start, the majority of these accounts were silent. The ones that did share messages, for instance, if we're talking about the Swiss Cameroonian activist Nathalie Yamb, who has been well known for promoting Russian activities, she took the Kremlin line. So she seemed to suggest that the rebellion may have been a way for Prigozhin to hoodwink the West into thinking that they will scatter Russia's advances in Ukraine. There was also one video by this other Cameroonian activist, Franklin Nyamzi. He also had the same line, and they downplayed the possibility of divisions between Russia, the Kremlin itself, and the Wagner Group. So it felt as if they still wanted to demonstrate that Russia continues to have an upper hand diplomatically. So there's still a way that Russia will continue to pull those strings and pull those narratives to win people over on its side.
You are listening to the Global Jigsaw from BBC Monitoring. Wagner's ambitions seem to have crossed into yet another continent where Russia has old friends. Not surprisingly, a lot of it is in the realm of sightings and unconfirmed reports. Here's more insight from Pascal Fletcher from our Latin America team.
There was a very specific report of a group of Wagner paramilitaries arriving in Venezuela in January 2019. And these reports came from international news agencies and security consultancies. And they basically said there was a group of sort of several hundred of them with the specific mission of protecting Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro and protecting him against possible kidnapping or assassination or overthrow, possibly being backed by the US. This was a period where there were reports of sort of unrest and even sort of revolts within the Venezuelan armed forces. So we have that very specific report. But besides that, there have been really quite frequent reports and sightings of suspected Russian military in parts of Venezuela, in the southeast state of Bolivar, and also along the Colombian frontier, where there have been a lot of sort of clashes with armed groups. And because of the nature of the kit and the weaponry that they carry, the suspicion is that they are Russians. But they could also be straight, Russian regular force military, because it's no secret that Venezuela has a military cooperation agreement with Russia.
Is there anything being reported beyond the group providing security services?
It's difficult to say, but certainly there has been a coincidence between reports of the presence of, suspected Russian military personnel, including potential Wagner, in gold mining areas of Venezuela. That would be southeast Bolivar province, which is really the sort of the heart of their gold producing area. But also, too, protecting oil installations, some of which, of course, are shared or have been used in the past by Russian companies like Rosneft.
So who are Russia's friends in this region, and how have they responded to the news of the Wagner revolt?
Venezuela, Cuba, and Nicaragua made very clear that they consider themselves strategic allies of Russia. We actually saw the Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro, Cuban President Miguel Diaz-Canel, and Nicaraguan President Daniel Ortega specifically sending on Twitter, on social media, greetings and solidarity and support to the Russian president.
Here's a message from Nicolas Maduro.
And
what does the world expect? That President Putin should just sit around and not act in defense of his people? That is why Venezuela announces all of its support to President Vladimir Putin in the defense of Russia's peace.
More widely, I think countries in Latin America reported the incidences of this, and as in the Western media, also raised a lot of questions. Does this show weakness inside of Russia? But in those three countries, in the Allies, very much solidarity, support, and towing the Kremlin line.
Another country Russia is looking at with hope for solidarity and support is China, which, as expected, provided a more reserved response. Tom Lam is from our China team.
Some of the state media report saying that the general Russian public opinion are behind Putin and that all sectors in the Russian society trust Putin and condemn the rebellion.
在莫斯科等地实行反恐行动制度。当天早些时候
However, we can see there's at least one exception, where partially state-owned Phoenix TV correspondent Lu Yuguan interviewing residents in Rostov, where a woman said actually there were 80% of the people supported Wagner.
Люди хотят правды, правды. 80% людей, они все поддерживают ЧВК.
How do the Chinese media assess Putin's hold on power after the mutiny?
In contrast to the majority of the Western media, which see Putin's position has been weakened after the mutiny, Chinese media, especially the nationalist tabloid Global Times, saw the incidents being resolved within 24 hours as a sign that the Kremlin maintained a strong capability of deterrence, which will further increase its authority, while acknowledging that the negative impact of the mutiny would have on Russia's political situation and the stability of Russia's military. For example, the high-profile former Global Times editor-in-chief Hu Xijin, who has offered a lot of analysis on geopolitical issues, he talks about Putin's power in the future. Here's what he says.
It seems that Putin's ability to deal with complex challenges should not be underestimated.
You couldn't expect a more different reaction from Ukraine. We have Margarita Malyukova to bring the perspective from a country invaded by Russia.
When the mutiny broke out, there was an explosion of memes on social media. It looked like people just lost sleep over the story because there was so much excitement. And the memes touched on a number of topics. For example, there were jokes that Prigozhin was recruited by Ukrainian intelligence and that this whole story was part of the Ukrainian counteroffensive. Everyone was wondering where the counteroffensive would begin. Would it be in the south of Ukraine? Would it be in the east of Ukraine? But it turned out that it started in Russia, so the joke goes. There were memes in which Prigozhin was described as this Ukrainian Cossack, was a typical Cossack fringe. They changed his name to Yevhen Prigozhin to make it sound more Ukrainian.
Ukrainians have been using humor throughout the war as a way of coping.
There are no illusions about Wagner in Ukraine. It's infamous. It's reportedly involved in some of the worst atrocities, including the Bucha massacre. But this humor is meant to lift people's spirits, to make them believe that Ukraine is capable of anything. On TV, for example, Prigozhin was still described as a terrorist when there were reports about this mutiny. And the dominant sentiment was that this fight should continue between Prigozhin and Putin, that the longer it continues, the better it is for Ukraine.
Потому что государство, в которое можно ногами выбивать в двери, в штаб округа, воюющей страны.
There was some hopeful analysis saying that this was the beginning of Russia's disintegration. But there are certainly other concerns. For example, some are saying that when Putin is humiliated, he might be tempted to escalate the situation. Even when the mutiny was underway, Ukraine was subject to a Russian missile attack. There were more than 40 missiles fired on Ukraine. And another issue is that there are reports of Wagner units being redeployed to Belarus, and Prigozhin reportedly also moved to Belarus. and this has raised concerns about possibly another attack on Ukraine from the north. However, the Ukrainian army is saying that such an attack would be suicidal because Ukraine has built many lines of defenses. People are not overly optimistic and are trying to be realistic and have faith, most of all, in the Ukrainian army, because that's the thing that Ukrainians can really count on.
Let's head back to Russia now, where it all started. Yevgeny Prigozhin is best known for heading the Wagner Group, but he has many hats, not to mention the chef's hat. He's the founder of a domestic media empire known as the Patriot Media Group. Its closure has just been announced. Here's a reminder from Francis of its activities and reach.
His most well-known website is called Ria Fan and has done many so-called investigations. I think you could perhaps call them hatchet jobs on the Russian opposition, for example. He's also involved in making films. One of his companies produced a film about Wagner's activities in Libya. There's also been a film about the Central African Republic, in which they've been depicted as heroes who have come to maintain security in states left in chaos by the former colonial powers, such as the French. And beyond that, of course, before Wagner became a household name, Prigozhin was best known in the West for the so-called Troll Farm, or the Internet Research Agency, as it's officially known, a body based in St. Petersburg, which was accused by the US government of interfering in the 2016 election for president and helping Donald Trump to beat Hillary Clinton in that electoral race.
The Telegram channels associated with the Wagner Group have also just made an announcement, a freeze on recruitment for a month. As with so many aspects of this global story, the key to it is in Russia, and we in BBC Monitoring continue to read the media landscape to find the missing bits of the jigsaw. That's all for this episode. Thanks to Francis Carr, Beverly Ochieng, Samia Hosni, Abdirahim Said, Pascal Fletcher, Margarita Maliukova, Barry Sadid and Tom Lamb. The producers are Krista Shaturi and me, Krassi Twig. The sound engineer is John Boland and the editor is Judy King. We have looked at Wagner's operations in Africa in a lot more detail in our previous episodes on the CAR and Mali. You can listen if you've missed them. And if you can, subscribe or follow the Global Jigsaw so you never miss an edition. That's all for now, and thanks for listening.